Malcolm, could I ask a follow-up question? Do we think the change in exchange rate regime has made the problem of managing the economic downturn easier or harder? I mean, how does this change their ability to manage the situation?
I believe the exchange rate policy change of 11 August was essentially a move in the right direction. The IMF has applauded it. They should have done it much earlier. The fact that they did it at that point has created enormous amounts of suspicion that they did it for ulterior motives, not to flexibilize the exchange rate management, but to regain export competitiveness. I think there is no reason to assume that was the case. The IMF had recommended explicitly in a written document that was published on August 4 that they do precisely what they did on August 11, only 1 week later. There's never been such a quick response to a written IMF recommendation. That I know that at the personal level, senior IMF officers have been recommended a change for setting the central parity rate in a different way already for years ago. But they didn't want to do it because they expected correctly that would lead to further appreciation of the rate. Now that the change predictably could lead to a depreciation of the rate, they finally made the big decision. But they could have done it many years ago, and it does indeed point to the wish of the financial managers led by Lou Jiwei and Zhou Xiaoxuan, and also, in my opinion, Wang Qishan, who is actually in charge of the anti-corruption drive, that they want to further liberalize the system. What they have done, they've persuaded all the politicos that joining the SDR valuation base is extremely important for China. And politically, it may be. It is as important as you believe it is. Technically, it has almost no importance at all. But it has given the financial managers cover in the internal political system to do what they feel is necessary, which included the exchange rate policy change of August 11 and the reduction in interest rates of yesterday and the reduction in the RRR and the bank reserve requirement rate. Incidentally, they have also yesterday attracted zero attention in the American financial press, but they very importantly also removed the ceiling on deposit rates. The ceiling on deposit rates was the single most important obstacle to financial sector liberalization in China. They removed it. The international press didn't even notice. So the question raised by Brian, and I'm sure it's on the minds of others, whether there is more to the exchange rate policy change of 11 August than sees the light of day. I personally am happy they did what they did. I think I can explain why they did it at the time they did it, because the overall economy is now, I think, needing or could benefit from a lower exchange rate. And the probability of a lower exchange rate was increased by this policy change. That was fairly technical. It's the way they set the central parity rate for the next start of the next day's trading. In the past, there were no limitations on that. The central bank could set that central parity rate anyway where it wanted. And then the next day, trading day, you had movement 2% up and down of the spot market. That has been changed. In setting the rate for the new day, they rely on the closing rate of the previous day. That's a significant innovation. It's the most significant exchange rate policy change since they severed the direct link between the dollar and the renminbi in, I think it was July 2005. So it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it has anything to do with the desire to regain export competitiveness. The devaluation is much too small for that, only 2.8% after 3 days. And because so much of their manufacturing has moved up the technology ladder and has become much less sensitive to exchange rates than they used to be in the past, when they were primarily assembling teddy bears.
I just find the language interesting when the euro drops, 2 or 3%, nobody shouts devaluation of the currency. I mean, there's this hype around China that somehow doesn't apply to the rest of the world.
Yeah, there is a lot of hype around China. The exchange, what is another interesting comment to add to my previous comments is that in the days following the decision, after August 14, the central bank, according to all information I could lay my hands on, has intervened in the market to avoid further depreciation. The Chinese were always accused of intervening in the market to avoid appreciation. Almost the exact opposite has actually been done. They've intervened in the market to avoid further depreciation, which was always the concern of Senator Schumer and his colleagues in the U.S. Senate.
Peter, could you explain more why they made that move?
Why? Well, it had been recommended by the IMF for years. The IMF is considering to include the yuan renminbi in the valuation base of the SDR, which is the only synthetic reserve currency in the world that we have. And that was created in 68 or 69, long time ago. The Chinese are that keen to get into the valuation base for the SDR because they believe that will help to make the renminbi a reserve currency. And it may help psychologically, but technically nothing much will change once the IMF accepts the renminbi in the valuation base.
Why did they intervene to prevent further depreciation?
Oh, because a high exchange rate and a stable exchange rate is supportive of the economic restructuring and rebalancing, which remains their top priority and has been acknowledged in the third plenum and at other major party convention as the top challenge they have to face. If you allow the renminbi to become too cheap, then it becomes attractive to start making teddy bears again, which is the opposite of what they need and want to do. The other motivation, I think, is that they sincerely want to get recognized as a reserve currency and believe that inclusion of the renminbi in the valuation base for the SDR is a significant step in that direction. I personally discount it. It is not significant technically. It's only significant psychologically and politically when enough people believe it is important.
So then we might say that the initial devaluation was completely misinterpreted by the international market.
That's my inclination also. I think what has happened is a technical change in the basis for setting the central parity rate for the start of next day's renminbi trading. Now, they should have made that change many years ago, as the IMF had recommended. Now that the IMF has come out more forcefully on that issue and actually put it black and white in the Article 4 report, which was published on August 4, the financial reformers, I think, had enough cover to make the change. That combined with the fact that, of course, global market conditions had changed in the meantime, and they could safely make that particular technical change without having to fear that the renminbi would start appreciating. In fact, it was expected that it would start depreciating, but they didn't want it to depreciate very much because a depreciated currency will A, make the rebalancing more difficult, and B, from their perception, will make it harder for the IMF board to include the renminbi in the valuation base. So that's why they did it at this time. It was very rational. I blame the central bank for not having explained clearly what they have done. This is typical of China's Communist Party. They do things. They don't bother about explaining themselves. The exchange rate is not a problem. What they have done is basically a positive move. They should have done it much earlier. But how it will be implemented, we don't know yet. All that happens now is that the setting of the starting rate for next day trading will be more closely related, according to what they say, to the closing day of yesterday. So that means that the location of the 2% band, the trading band itself is now more responsive to market forces. But whether they will actually do it that way or not depends on whether they will continue to intervene in the market. Because if the exchange rate goes higher or lower than they feel comfortable with, they may still intervene, which could then nullify the effect of this otherwise positive policy change that was made on the 11th of August.